Our guest on the Because Miami podcast this week is a survivor of the 2018 massacre at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. He's the co-founder of March for Our Lives, one of the most important protest movements of our time. He's the co-writer with his younger sister and fellow survivor of the best-selling book, Glimmer of Hope, How Tragedy Sparked a Movement. He is 22 years old, and he is one of the most inspirational voices of his generation. David Hogg, thank you for joining us. I want to
Thanks for having me on.
I want to ask right out of the gate, another day, another mass shooting, another week, another mass shooting at a school, most recently, where you were recently in Tennessee and in Nashville, 3 9-year-olds dead in addition to staff and teachers and the head of the school. How does it make you feel, just personally, when another one of these tragedies, I almost hate using the word tragedy. It makes it sound like it's uncontrollable. It's just a random sort of thing that happens. So when another one of these massacres happens, how do you feel about it in your life and your activism?
Well, first, Billy, I just want to say it might have looked like I was on the ground in Tennessee, but I am a college student, so I wasn't there, but I was posting a lot of videos from people, including our staff, that were on the ground helping lead those walkouts. I would have loved to have been there. I would love to be there right now. It's just I'm in my final semester at school and I got to balance that. But it makes me feel awful. I'll tell you what, though, this one felt different for me. And the reason why it felt different is because I woke up after the awful news of what happened in Nashville, and I just decided that I had to do something different. I think we all have to do more, and we have to do things different, right? Because what we have been doing hasn't been working. And I thought, in my position, I've said the same things over and over again. How can I change this conversation more? And I actually decided to change the conversation more by going out this past weekend and going skeet shooting with a friend of mine who's been skeet shooting his entire life. I grew up around guns. My dad was an FBI agent. I would often come home from school, several times a year after he would be shooting for quals, and he would be cleaning his guns. And I think I wanted to show people that, it's possible both to, my family owns guns. It's possible to own guns and support common sense reforms, right? Like here in Massachusetts, where I'm speaking to you from right now, we have a gun death rate 70% lower than the rest of the country. 70%, right? You can still get a gun here, and it's not a super easy process, but guess what? These are guns. It shouldn't be a ridiculously easy process. It shouldn't be like going into a store and just getting a pack of Tic Tacs or anything like that. These are weapons made to kill, and we need a clear process to make sure that only the people that are going to practice responsibility with these are going to be able to get these weapons that are so dangerous in the first place.
Thank you for correcting me. You're not on the ground in Tennessee, but it is you are talking to us from your dorm room right now. I mean, it is somewhat remarkable, this life that you lead. And I wonder, when walking around on campus in your non-activist life, do people know who you are? Do people approach you? Do people want to talk about this issue? Do people want to tell you to go screw yourself? How does that work?
Yeah, well, I think sometimes there are people who come up to me and want to tell me to go screw myself plenty of times, as we've seen from Marjory Green and many others. But there are also people who are also supportive. But I really think, Billy, the thing that we need more of in this conversation about what we're doing about guns in this country, what we're doing specifically about gun violence, is to have a dialogue and less debate. I don't think that just arguing about this is going to get us any further here. I'm interested in figuring out what we can agree on and moving forward from there, even if I don't agree with somebody that I think that an AR-15 should be able to be purchased by, an 18-year-old just as easily as possible, like the shooter at my high school who was 19 did with his. I've come to see a lot of the people who very ardently disagree with me, not as people, that hate me. Obviously, many of them do, though, but as people that I just haven't had the chance to talk to yet. I want to point out, too, the majority of gun owners are not members of the NRA or any major gun organization. The majority of Americans support stronger gun laws. And I think the majority of gun owners do support, these common sense solutions moving forward in the first place. It's an extreme minority that are defining this debate for us and are derailing any progress on this issue.
Sure. Who are the Americans that want their children to die at school? Nobody wants that to happen. But the cynicism of this, because the NRA, which is basically a failed organization from an organizational standpoint, was incredibly successful from a culture wars and ideological standpoint, where they've changed the conversation somehow. I mean, the AR-15 has been around since the late 1950s, early 60s. It was a military weapon. Then the M16 basically replaced it. It became, in its quote-unquote semi-automatic form, a weapon marketed to police and then ultimately consumers. And it was popular, but sales were kind of flat until the assault weapons ban sunsetted in 2004. And then all of a sudden, this trade group and this group turned it in. And the cynicism of it was all marketing. It was all to sell these guns, which went from basically less than 200,000 AR-15. And again, for everybody who wants to call in is going to give me shit about this on the hotline. AR-15 style. It's like saying Kleenex. I know it's not literally an AR-15, but we all know what we're talking about here, okay? It's like saying Kleenex or Coke. We know what it means, okay? So the point is that less than 200,000 of these things were sold in like 2003, 04. And the next thing you know, less than 10 years later, they're selling 2 million of these things. But now NRA feels a little sidelined to me, but you still have these people, these proselytizers, though, who almost religiously, in a zealous way, say that this is our symbol of freedom, is what this is, as opposed to a military weapon of death. How do you combat that?
I think it's about reframing the conversation. Like I said, in Massachusetts, we have gun laws and it's not easy to get a gun in the state. But again, I cannot name a single gun owner that believes that doesn't know a single person that should not have a gun in the first place. What scares me about this, and what I think we're getting at here, Billy, it's not anything about responsibility. It's about salesmanship and selling as many of these guns to as many people as possible, even if that means irresponsible and dangerous people are getting them right in the first place. Right. Because I believe, unlike an iPhone, with the guns that they're selling, an AR-15 doesn't break down in 2 years. It doesn't. So you have to keep selling them, selling and expanding that market more and more to sell them. How do you do that? You have to weaken gun laws to sell more guns, to enable more gun violence, to scare more people, to sell more guns, to enable gun violence, and repeat that cycle and just churn out more and more guns as there's more and more death, to basically bring America to a point where every single person thinks they need to have a gun in order not to die at the supermarket or the grocery store or anything like that. And it's insane. Responsible gun owners, like most of my family members, believe that there should be a stringent process that ensures only responsible people are getting these guns, because the world that Ron DeSantis is trying to create is essentially one where little brawls that can happen at a little league match or a soccer game between the referee or the umpire and a hothead parent who is taking the game way too seriously turns not just into a fist fight at worst, but potentially a gunfight. Because you don't know if these people have guns in the first place because of the things like permitless carry. And that is the entire purpose here. The purpose that Republicans are pushing for is not responsible gun ownership. It is irresponsible salesmanship to anyone that can get a gun in the first place to scare more people and sell more guns. Because as my final point, Billy, contrary to what most people believe, when there is a mass shooting, gun laws actually get weaker after that. And it results in more violence and more sales. And they're trying to bring us to this place that is not a land of law and order. They're trying to bring us to a place of total chaos and irresponsibility where anyone, even the most irresponsible and dangerous person, can get a gun. It's ridiculous.
Well, I'm talking to you now from a place where people take sports way too seriously, and I don't think any of them should have guns, but you're absolutely right. We're talking about turning Florida into Dodge City, into the wild, wild west. And what you said is absolutely true. After these mass shootings, the conversation is somehow insanely that more guns will lead to fewer shootings. More guns will lead to fewer people firing those guns and killing people with those guns. It's not that's the thing. How do you have a real conversation with people who think that more guns are the answer, who think that permitless carry, there's no such thing as constitutional carry? Call the hotline and give me shit about it. There's no such thing as constitutional carry. It is not in the Constitution. It is simply not. You've been lied to if you think that. The Second Amendment is entirely in the context of a well-regulated state militia. It does not say that you can have a Stinger missile or a tank or a Black Hawk helicopter and fly it around to your heart's content. It simply doesn't say that. It's not true. How do you reason with people who think these school shootings didn't happen and you're a crisis actor? How do you have a serious policy? I understand debate is healthy and policy discussions can actually make laws better. You and I may have the wrong idea. Maybe there's a way to improve upon these ideas with some pushback and healthy debate. But how do you start?
Well, I think, first of all, it's not taking that extreme fringe of people who do not represent the vast majority of responsible gun owners seriously. We need to have more responsible gun owners in this conversation that understand that, sure, if we need to have a more straightforward process, if we need to wait 10 more days to get a gun and that can help reduce gun suicides and domestic violence and murder, we're willing to do that because we understand that this gun ownership is not just about an individual's responsibility when they have a gun to make sure that their guns are locked up and kept away from ammunition so a kid doesn't get a hold of it. It's also about a collective responsibility in the first place, right? It's about the collective responsibility of our society to ensure that if you want to get a gun, it's ensured that you were responsible, that you were going to be safe with it, that you were trained with it. Right. What we need to do is recognize the vast majority of gun owners, even in a state like Florida, do not support permitless carry. Right. And to allow these people to have this kind of platform and legitimate their extremist views and act like they speak for the majority of gun owners is frankly ridiculous. And we need to make sure 70%. Billy, we need to make sure that more gun owners like yourself are showing up at places like Tallahassee and saying, yes, I am a gun owner. Yes, I support responsibility, but I also understand that if there needs to be a couple more steps to ensure that my kid gets to survive kindergarten, I am willing to do that. And I think every responsible gun owner supports that in the first place. That's the conversation we need to be having. Because the reason, Billy, why they bring up these crazy, ridiculous conspiracy theories is because they have no argument. Because they know after a school shooting, whenever they say you can't talk about this, you're politicizing this, what do you do, Billy, when the very kids who went through that school shooting, the mass shooting generation, what do you do when those kids are speaking up and walking out of their schools and saying we demand action? You have to do something truly despicable, which is convince people that those kids don't exist, that they work for the CIA or the FBI, so that the smear becomes the story and the students' voices get lost. The kids and the victims get lost and we don't remember them, so that smear is the only thing you think about in this conversation and not the very logical things we're talking about here. Common sense things like needing references if you want to get a gun to make sure that, there's a common sense process in the place to ensure responsibility. We need to take this conversation back from that extreme fringe of gun owners who don't represent people like my family or yours, Billy, and make sure that the average gun owner in this country who is not a member of the NRA is front and center in these conversations as a representative of gun owners and not some extreme fringe.
Last month, a poll from the University of North Florida Research Institution in the Panhandle showed that 70% of Floridians are against permitless carry. 70. So when you say majority, there's not 70% of Floridians that agree on anything, but we agree that we should. And of course, they passed it. It was quietly signed, and it could get so much worse. How does that make you feel when we take like half step forward and then like 10 steps back, and people want to have a conversation about mental health? And it's not the fact that we now have millions of AR-15s. AR-15 style weapons, across this country. It's that mental health is apparently deteriorating. Like, I don't want to not have a mental health conversation, but how is it not the guns, the access to the guns for people with poor mental health?
Yeah, well, I think it's important that we have both conversations, but at the same time, we acknowledge the fact that what mental illness, right, is not what causes somebody specifically like the shooter in Buffalo, who is a self-declared white supremacist, to go and commit that act. Hatred is not a mental illness. And we do, gun owners, responsible gun owners, need to have this conversation about mental health, but with nuance. 2/3 of gun deaths in this country are suicides. We do need to fund mental health more to address those. The community of gun owners need to have a conversation in the first place about what they are doing, what people like the members of my family who own guns are doing to ensure that we are practicing the best mental health practices we can as a society and putting that forward, but not just acting like the only, like anybody who's mentally ill is going to be a perpetrator of violence. The vast majority of people who have mental illnesses are not going to go and harm somebody else. They're far more likely to harm themselves. And that's what gets lost in that conversation. But at the same time, like you said, we do need to talk about the fact it's not just about why somebody pulls the trigger. It's about how they get a gun, right? In threat assessment, it's often talked about where you need to talk about capability and intent, right? We need to talk about the intent. Why is somebody picking up a gun? Why are they pulling the trigger? We need to address poverty, systemic inequality, bad schools, lack of resources, all of that stuff. But we also need to address the capability, the fact that a 19-year-old was able to buy and obtain an AR-15 and shoot up my high school. Despite making multiple threats against my school, he was able to continue to own that gun. That is insane, right? We need to talk about the fact that they say gun laws don't work, Billy. I want to tell you a story. Somebody threatened my mom and sent her a death threat that said, I can't say this on air, but said an expletive with the NRA and you will be dead on arrival, or DOA. We used the law that we passed after Parkland to disarm that individual. That same law has now been used over 9,000 times in Florida. That's a law with due process and a right to counsel that was passed by our then Republican state legislature and signed by Governor Rick Scott. That ensures that there's due process and a right to counsel, and that it's not just an instance where your neighbor gets mad because you mowed part of their lawn and now they're going to call and want to take your guns away. That's not at all what's happening here. There is a straightforward process that has due process involved to make sure that people like the shooter at my high school can't continue to have an AR-15 if they threaten to shoot up a school multiple times, right? It's common sense stuff like that, but we need to change this conversation in that we need to have gun owners, the majority of gun owners who do support these common sense laws, say, no, the NRA doesn't speak for me. The NRA doesn't speak for my family. I speak for me. Responsible gun owners speak for themselves. And we, as a community, like my family members, have a responsibility to go out there and talk about how we can make sure that irresponsible and dangerous people are not getting guns. What they're fearing here is something illogical, which is that we're going to come and take everybody's guns. First of all, there are multiple Supreme Court cases that stand in the way of that, along with the current court.
Of course.
On top of that, there are 400 million guns in this country. The U.S. government can barely keep itself funded. If you think it's going to be able to take away 400 million guns, you need to go and take a logic test, because that's just illogical in the first place. But that just detracts from the fact that that is a theoretical situation, right? That people are afraid of. They aren't talking about the reality of this situation, in that 2/3 of gun deaths in this country are suicides, and our kids are fearing for their lives every single day in their schools. Yesterday at a rally that we had here at my college, I heard from elementary school teachers who talked about having to do lockdown drills with their kids and teach them how to play hide and seek, not as a fun game, but as a survival strategy. I had to hear from a 16-year-old at one of the most privileged schools in this country, at Cambridge Ridge and Latin, that talked about how they've had to go through school shooter drills, right? This is affecting everyone from the richest and most well-known to the poorest and least known people, and everywhere in between. Gun owners have a responsibility. The majority of gun owners who support these laws have a responsibility to speak out against the extreme fringe that acts like they speak for them and say, no, hell no, you do not speak for me. We need to stand up together, and we need to acknowledge, yes, we can have gun ownership in this country, but massive amounts of gun violence does not need to be part of that equation, and it shouldn't be.
Yeah, so fixated on the science fiction of the government coming and taking away our guns and not dealing with the reality of people dying every single day in these mass casualty incidents. David Hogg, marchforourlives.com. Good luck to you. Thanks so much for being here with us.
Thanks. I appreciate it.